please take the podium or whatever you like, and if I think that's your presentation is up there. Okay.
Thank you so much. So guys, just to make sure you can hear me, right? So if you can hear me, and if I sound strange, this means that the mic works just fine. Okay, so I would like to have a very short talk to really exchange thoughts on how to put really numbers on privacy risks. So in terms of me, I'm generally having 3 hats. One of them, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Log Sentinel. We are a blockchain-enabled information security company. The second one, I'm the chairman at the Institute for Data Ethics and Analytics. So with this charming gentleman just before me, we're actually working on data ethics, on privacy issues, on the ethics of artificial intelligence, automated decision-making, and machine learning. And then the final thing, I'm also teaching risk management at Sofia University. My background is PhD in economics and data modeling, Master of Science in computer and system sciences, and another master's in economics and econometrics. So let me just begin by giving you the usual story on privacy, right? When we think about privacy and putting really numbers on the privacy risk, there is this sort of usual story. We have the dark corporates, right? Corporations, governments, the military data complex, right? And then we have the good who want to get your data and then use it for their nefarious purposes. And then we have the good guys, right? Guys like us. Right, the good guys, and they're really fighting to protect your data, and we're really thinking about decentralized solutions, and we really think about putting numbers on privacy risks, and then thinking about having a secure blockchain-enabled database like we at Log Sentinel developed, right? Really doing the right thing with the data of people. And that's the usual story. That's a reassuring story, right? We enjoy this story. However, there is this only one little slight problem with this story, and it's completely wrong, right? And that's obviously a problem with. Let me see how that would work. Right, so that was supposed to be a dramatic effect, but we couldn't quite get it. Guys, just making sure, is the presentation working? Right, is it? Cool. So let's look a bit more carefully right now. And now that we're putting numbers, let me just give you a slide with numbers, right? So let's slide with numbers. And that's a Boston Consulting Group research from just last year. And there you see how consumers and companies think what is really an acceptable use of the data which is being collected from consumers. And then essentially the way you read this chart is you look at the green thing, and the green means that people find it acceptable. First line, that would be consumers. Second line, that would be companies. So used for internal improvement, 92% of consumers say, well, that's fine. Marketing products from third parties, 80% of consumers say that's fine. Used for personalization of offers, 80% of consumers say that's fine. Anonymous use by third parties, sorry, that would be 90%. Anonymous use by third parties, 73% of consumers say it's fine. And when you see there is a huge disconnect, essentially people are much more permissive about their data than companies think they are, right? So essentially the bad guys, the companies who want to take your data and use it for their profitability purposes, are actually more careful about your data than you are. And so that's quite an insight, right? My insight from here is, well, little problem. Nobody cares about privacy. Right? And it's a tough thing to say here, right? It's a tough thing to actually come to a LibertyBits conference and say, people don't care about privacy. Almost no one cares about privacy. Obviously, you have such rooms with smart, excellent, good people who do. However, we're in the very, very, very small minority. So the obvious question is, so now what? Okay? So almost no one cares. Now what? And I have 2 very simple ideas, 2 very simple propositions to normalize really the way of thinking about privacy and to really embed privacy thinking in organizational life. First thing would be treat data as an asset, right? And this is not done at this point, which is shocking enough, right? We keep pushing this idea that the knowledge economy is powered and enabled by big data, by machine learning, by cloud computing, by whatever, right? But we don't treat data as an asset. We don't put it on the balance sheet. We don't amortize it. We don't put a value on it. We don't know how much it costs, right? We don't do that. And then the second idea is, now that you have treated data as an asset, why don't you treat the privacy risk, the risk of a data breach, as just a new kind of operational risk? What I'm trying to say here is normalize the thinking about data, translate a privacy issue into regular speak that could be understood by regulators, by corporations, by governments, and by regular people, and really put numbers on that in order to bring home the point that this thing is valuable and that this thing must be protected. And that's really all this talk is all about. Put numbers on data so everyone gets it, so everyone would know what is at stake. And what numbers can we put on data? Let me just give you a few examples. The dollar revenue per person from marketing data in the US is almost at $300 annually. That's the data marketing companies extract from people, from each person they process their data on every single year. Numbers like the total cost of a complete personal data, including the electronic health record, that can go up to $3,000 per person. That's how much your data would cost, right? I mean, if you give it for free just by clicking accept cookies, right, then you're giving away a 3K type of deal, right? And if you give away your $3,000 worth of data just to read a single article of dubious quality, are we really getting a good deal there, right? Are we really getting a good deal? Numbers like the online profiles which were breached for just last year. Actually, the number is even a bit higher. It stands at 4.5 billion, right? As Mitko just said, if your data isn't in the open, it will be in a few months, right? So worry not about that. And then the chance to get hacked over the next 2 years, you have a 28% chance to get hacked. So essentially, what are all those little numbers telling us? This will bring cost. If there is a data breach, an average company would suffer an $8 million cost if there is a data breach. So we're living in an interesting world, right? And the world we live in is that we have a lot of data. The protection of this data is terrible. The cost of having a breach is extremely high. The value of your data is extremely high. And yet we can't quite manage to protect this data, right? And we can't really manage to get across the idea that privacy is important. Usually the graph I like to show when I have a privacy talk is the Facebook stock price, right? And when you see there is a data breach, so the stock price goes down, and then in a few months the stock price is again on trajectory, and then there is a data breach, goes down again at trend, and then goes down at trend, right? Essentially what we see is very, very little volatility, and it rebounds very quickly, right? My take home is, well, we can't really manage to get across the idea that this thing is important. So what we should do instead, I believe, and it might be useful to know, is really collect internal and external numbers on privacy and get an idea of the risks on that. I mean, you can get pretty fancy by building the statistical distributions. You can get somewhat more top line by not doing that, but do collect numbers and model it as an operational risk. The privacy risk, the risk of a data breach, must be normalized and embedded into every single organization. When you think about risk, data risk, privacy risk must be on top of your list, because data is your top asset. And essentially, when you do that, you can do all sorts of fancy things, right? You're free to do that. And here I'm just showing you the not very pretty pictures from a little Monte Carlo modeling simulation we did on privacy risks, right? Essentially, you can get an idea of the losses you will incur if a single event would happen. You'll get an idea of the probability distribution of events. You'll get an idea of the annual loss distribution. So you can do a lot of things once you start thinking formally about protecting your data, about modeling quite formally the privacy risk as an operational one. So my take-home message is, say, quite simple. And the takeaway is, let us change minds by normalizing the way of thinking about privacy, by speaking about privacy in a comprehensive language, by using the terms people will understand, by embedding privacy into organizational structures, cultures, and business processes, by normalizing it as saying, well, that's an operational risk. That's a risk on your asset, right? And I think if we can possibly do that, we'll go so much forward, right? Because people will understand the value of their data and will start thinking about it. And also corporations will understand the value of their assets and will start protecting it better. With this, the only thing I can say is I'm quite hopeful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Anton. That was quite interesting. So it would be good to get a couple of questions. And while you're thinking of a question, so there's a question right there if we can get a microphone. But let me start off by asking you this. You showed us earlier the survey data about consumers thinking, how their data can be used. Is it acceptable or not?
Yeah.
And don't you think sometimes, people answer on a survey and it's like theoretical. Yes, in theory, I'm okay if they use my anonymized data. But then those same individuals, if they're involved in a data breach or they read what's happening on the news, they start complaining. Oh, why are they not asking for my permission to do this? So don't you think there's maybe a gap between how people answer A, B, C, or acceptable, non-acceptable, versus how they actually act in reality?
Yeah, of course there is a gap. Obviously there is a huge gap. What I'm afraid is that the gap is in the opposite direction. When you're given a one-shot choice, right? Do I accept, do I not accept? You say, okay, I don't accept, maybe. It doesn't make sense for me at this instance. However, if you're given 500 choices this year, right? If you're given 1,000 choices, when do you become tired of changing your preferences and then turning off your marketing cookies, right?
So there's an element of conditioning, I guess.
Of course there is.
Okay.
I mean, there is a recent research which showed that if the average user would read every single privacy policy and all the terms and conditions of the services they're using, they should spend 70 full-time days a year, right? So imagine 2 months not working, just reading privacy policies, or doing the default click, I accept, I consent, I agree. So my concern is actually people will go in the other direction. When there is a sort of consent fatigue, right, you can't really govern your data when you have 3,000 choices, right? Every year you get 3,000 choices. Do we turn those cookies on? Do we turn those cookies off? Would I like to use multi-factor authentication here or not? Do I give my data to this third-party provider or not, right? A lot of choices. How can we possibly manage that?
So the system's broken.
Yeah, it is. It's actually very broken.
Okay, let's get the question over.
Yeah. But only provocative questions, right?
I'm sorry?
Only provocative questions.
No, not really.
Oh.
I think you spoke about how companies have to put numbers on data.
Yeah.
Is there a way for private individuals to, something concrete to say, okay, my data is worth so much. What can we actually do to put numbers on data and understand it as valuable as individuals?
That's actually an excellent question. The usual way for an individual to know how much their data is worth is to actually wait until it leaks out and gets up for sale in the darknet, right? There you get a very exact price of how much this sort of huge data set is worth with this amount of data. So you just get the price, maybe in Bitcoin, who knows. You divide it by the number of entries, and you get an idea of the average cost of data. By the way, the numbers I showed you here, the electronic health record data, that's exactly from such sort of calculation. I mean, there was a huge health data records breach, right? It got for sale. And when you divided the number that was up there by the number of individuals, you get the average individual data. Probably I should make a very important distinction here. Some data is more valuable, thus more costly than other data. For example, if you think about your average consumer, that's not very interesting data, right? I mean, you can put me in a machine learning algorithm, and then this will generate some insight, and you can take me out and put somebody else who is just as average as I am, and it won't make any difference, right? So that's cheap data. However, if you think about people that are very rare, and you get very small samples of them, their data is hugely expensive. I mean, obviously, on the benign side, an example would be people with rare genetic conditions, people with rare diseases, right? Currently, clinical research organizations, big pharma, they're actually fighting over this data in order to develop new drugs. So that's on a benignish side, right? On the not so benignish side, think about data of the 1%ers, right? The really, really, really rich people. That's difficult data to obtain, right? But once you know what is the marketing drivers for the rich people, what makes the richest guys buy your product, then you're onto something, right? So it will be a very, very dependent on the rarity of data, how easy it is to obtain, right? And the scope of the data. But you can get obviously averages.
And is there a market for fake data?
Yeah, of course.
So I can say, oh, look, I've got the social security records of 10 million people, and somebody will actually pay me money for that, even though it's like made-up data,
yeah, of course,
random data.
They actually had this sort of case, I think, of a large provider of geolocation services, right? So the idea is what they did is they would track people in terms of the GPS in their smartphones, right? And they would sell their geolocation data to marketing apps so that they will know, okay, this person is next to this shop, right? So we can push in a promotion for this shop, right? We can push in a discount there. And it turns out that after careful investigation, about 30 to 40% of data is non-existent data. It's either imputed data, it's forecasted data, or it's data which is in such a broad range it's not useful, right? So essentially half of the data those guys are selling is fake data. And they sell it, and they sell it.
So we have a couple more minutes for one more question. Let's go with the gentleman at the back. He has the microphone. Yeah.
Yes, hello. So you're mainly talking about information about our health that is being collected and sold around the world. What other information does companies mainly search for? What other data?
Well, I mean, if we think what are the next frontiers are always personalization, right? I mean, currently we're at the frontier of personalization of offers, right? For example, the Amazon personalization, the whatever. The next thing we probably will be seeing is not only health data, but we'll be seeing probably DNA data, right? In terms of personalized medicine, right? You actually need data on your DNA and sequencing. So if I think about the progress that we'll be seeing over the next year, my hunch would be we'll have a rapid push of biometrics, right? In terms of facial recognition, in terms of gait recognition, in terms of fingerprinting, of retina scanning, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next push will probably be DNA data, right? Because that's the perfect way to customize any product or offering, beginning with probably medicine, like treatment or drug, specifically to the genotype that you hold, right? So this will probably be the next big frontier. Apart from that, there will be an explosion of non-personal data, like the IoT type of data. But this, I guess, will be less interesting, right? People will be less touchy on how well your lamp is protected than on how well their genes are protected, right? So I think there will be a bit of a difference there. But yeah, that's how I see the future over the next 5 to 10 years.
Fascinating. Well, thank you very much for that. Very insightful.
Thank you so much for having me.
Round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.